Hey guys, so Lord here, back again with another edition of Throwback Thursdays, and what I have for you today is the Kenner Mummies Alive Rath. Now before we get into the meat and taters of this review, since I no longer have the packaging for this figure, let us first take a look-see at his lone accessory. A black plastic sword. Now if you remember the show, you remember the sword was silver, a bit of a green hilt, and this snake coiled around it was gold. So I would have been okay with a gold or a silver sword, but at least the sculpt is show accurate. We'll give him that. Give Kenner a pass there. That said, it's also very Scimitar-esque, so maybe that's more or less what it's supposed to be. So I'm kind of thrown off by this knuckle guard piece being on the back. Typically those are in the front, but to each their own, I suppose. Will say though, the snake being coiled around this the way it is a very nice touch. Looks really nice. And taking our figure here, you can put this in his right hand like so. Sits in there nice and snug. It's got some wobble to it, but it's fine. And his other hand can't hold crap because the thumb is molded to his four fingers there. But as far as his accessories go, that is his only weapon or handheld accessory. Of course, like Jakal, who we looked at a couple of weeks ago, this guy does have a bunch of snap-on armor bits, but we'll move on to that before we get into the size comparisons. But taking a look at Rath, he's meant to be the smart member of the team, which this team has every 90s stereotype. It has the smart guy, the strong guy, Armand, who we'll be looking at in a couple of weeks, Jakal, the team leader, who we looked at a couple weeks ago, and Nefertina, which, like most 90s superhero teams, they never make the female member, and she is the female member of the team, so, you know, of course. But at any rate, at least compared to a lot of 90s female characters, she was a little bit more developed. She was kind of interesting, but that is what it is, I suppose. You're rich, you can spend $300 and get one from good old Europe, I guess, so there's that. But Rath, being the smart guy, he was also the slender guy. He was pretty slim in the show. This guy's pretty jacked. He's about as jacked as Jakal was, so that's kind of funny. I don't think it's bad. I think it looks cool. I think he looks great this way. I will say I would have liked his kind of ninja straps hanging off the back of his head here. He did have like two bandages hanging off the back of his head that kind of looked like the bandana on a Ninja Turtle. I wish those were present here, but they probably did that so you can move the head around and put the snake armor on. So it is what it is. I would have liked that, but this is, of course, before the time of interchangeable heads, so they had to work with what they had. Then as far as this belt goes, it is just a loose floaty piece, so there's that. He has this little amulet there. Not sure if I pointed that out on Jakal, but they all have different amulets. And I do believe the sculpt is completely different on this guy. I don't believe it's the same. It's definitely different on Armand, who again we'll look at in a couple weeks here, but I think all the mummies have unique sculpts. I don't think Rath and Jakal were recycled in any way. That said, I mentioned that Jakal came out at a time when Kenner was just kind of starting to break the mold. And I say that because I'm used to Kenner putting out like the 3-inch Star Wars, like the old 70s and 80s stuff, where they were just kind of like straight up and down. And then the Kenner Batman stuff, you know, about the time these came out, were pretty straight up and down as well. You know, the animated stuff had some action pose to it. They had some poses to them, but they weren't like super jacked and super like hyper detailed like this. They started doing that more or less with Total Justice, the Legends of the Dark Knight, which is a really awesome, almost Todd McFarlane looking Batman series. The Gargoyles line, they kind of broke the mold a little bit and did something else. And then Power of the Force, of course. Try saying that 5 times fast. They did some different things there. They built Star Wars characters more like Masters of the Universe guys. And, you know, the rest is history. And then they got bought out by Hasbro. So, you know, it is what it is. But it's kind of funny to see a company that kind of started out and got big with like a standard 3-inch straight up and down, like a Nutcracker type figure, because, you know, the Christmas style Nutcracker is straight up and down as well, to go to something like this, which is getting more into the Spawn realm of things, because that's what Todd McFarlane was doing for a couple of years already, was figures like this. Granted, they were way more pre-posed and had asymmetrical articulation, but you know what I mean. But as far as this guy goes, his head will rotate, his arms will move up and down. He actually has a waist swivel, which I can't say is present on a ton of Kenner figures, but it is on a few. Then his hips move forward and back. So, he does have peg holes at the bottom of the feet. For the stand, he does not come with, but I think the stands from the good old Todd father work on these. They did on some of the gargoyles, so there's that. That said, though, we need to get this guy armored up, because it's kind of interesting how you armor him up. So first thing I like to do is I like to turn the head sideways, because it makes this chest piece a little bit easier to slip on. So we'll do that quick here. There. His nose kind of gets in the way if you have it facing forward, so that's why I do that. I gotta tell you, out of all like the transformation sequences and armor designs, Rath here has one of my favorites, and I'll get into that in a minute here. Let's see, next up we have the gauntlets. Just clip on, like so. Actually, I think this is the other side. Yep, had it on the wrong side. Then we got this one here. I will say his armor is also a little bit tighter than Jakal's, especially in the gauntlets. He's got one boot right there, another boot right here, and then the helmet snaps onto the top here. Now I'm kind of excuse me, surprised they went and hollowed the top out. Seems to me like they could have left that solid, but maybe that's how it was in the show. I can't remember exactly. It's been a while since I've watched it, but the hat does kind of help hold it in place. And it is a pretty snug fit, much like Jakal. So, you know, considering again that this is a 1996-7 era figure, that's not too bad. We were getting way worse before this, and way worse after this, actually. So this is pretty good. But the thing I like the most about this guy's design is they incorporated the snake tail, and here it is. And what you do is you wrap it around his legs like this, and peg it into the back. And that, to me, looks kick-ass. I love the way that looks aesthetically. Yeah, it's cumbersome as far as articulation goes. You can't really pose him this way, but he only has 5 points anyways. You're not going to get a lot out of that. Shy of getting like a new school version of this line, I guess we'll give him a sword. A new school version of this line that's like 6 or 7 inch scale where this tail is bendy. That's just the nature of the beast, man. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I think this looks awesome. And I really like this figure. One of my favorites of this line. Granted, there's not a lot to choose from, which sucks because one of the other characters in this show, Pippin, I think it's Pippin, he's a shape-shifting cobra that turns into like your stereotypical blonde white guy biker dude. He was a cool character. He was supposed to get made and he never did, but I can't say he looked as good as Rath here. He looked a little bit more cheesy, we'll say. Because you had, you know, the biker pants and the snake tail wrapped around it. It looks kind of funny. It looks like a dude wearing a snake mask more so than a, you know, like a snake man with a tail for legs. So take that for what it's worth. But with that being said, let's now move on and take a look at some size comparisons. First up here is Rath next to a couple other 90s superhero figures from around the same time. We have the Toy Biz Danny Ketch Ghost Rider from the Deluxe Ghost Rider Hell Cycle 2-pack, and Spawn 1 from Spawn Series 1. And, you know, for what it's worth, we gotta give all the credit in the world to the good old Todfather, because while this Spawn 1 may be naive to today's standards, without this figure, we might not have a lot of the things we have nowadays. So, gotta give credit where it's due there. Next up, here he is alongside the only other Kenner Mummies Alive figure I've taken a look at, on this channel anyways, thus far, Jakal. Now, I'm not 100% sure of the scale between these two characters since, as I said before, it's been a while since I've seen this show, but I can only assume being the team leader, Jakal's meant to be a little bit taller than Rath. That said, if you look at this Jakal figure anyways, you can tell that his knees are a little bit more bent than Rath's. That, and Rath also has that tall Egyptian style hat going for him when they're not all armored up. That said, they're pretty much the same height and figure form, which is fine with me. And last but certainly not least, we have our two regulars, the Mythic Legion's Brother Mandibulus. Living Spawn as usual, towers over everyone. So with that being said, time to wrap things up, some final thoughts. Overall, and as I said before in my review of Jakal from a couple of weeks ago, these figures are pretty much ahead of their time, at least as far as a figure line that revolves around this type of gimmick is concerned. Granted, I don't have much experience with figure lines that revolve around the clip-on armor bits and whatnot, outside of the Xanatos figures from the Gargoyles line, the occasional Batman figure Kenner made for the animated series or otherwise, or if we're going to go way outside the box, Exoskeleton Spawn, which reminds me, I need to do a review of that sometime. But as far as I'm concerned, the Kenner Mummies Alive line is some of the best implementation of clip-on armor bits out of any figure line, which is a bold statement because plenty of figure lines attempted this both before and after these guys came out. But as far as I'm concerned, the Mummies Alive line from Kenner has some of the best implementation of the gimmick ever, making the figures look more heroic, which, since they're superheroes, makes all the more sense. If anything, this gimmick takes nothing away from the figures and doesn't ruin the aesthetic. If anything, it enhances it by making them look like how they did in the animated series. So, if you are a fan of lines like Power Rangers or anything that revolves around this type of gimmick, I would highly suggest you track down all these guys and pick them up as soon as possible before prices get a little bit too steep, because while they were pretty cheap when I got them several years ago, they're slowly starting to creep up in value, so just be mindful of that. And while I do have mixed emotions about not completing the whole team here in the States, I mean, we are lacking a Nefertina here, right? I still think this line is worth picking up, mostly because it is quite small. There are only 5 figures in this line, and they're relatively easy to find. Now the price, as I said before, not quite sure what they're going for nowadays, but if you can afford it, I highly suggest you pick them all up. You won't regret it, I assure you. So, with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed this week's edition of Throwback Thursdays. If you are so inclined, please don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you know whenever I upload more reviews like this one. If you haven't already, please hit me up on Instagram at Overlord Productions. But as always, keep the comments civil, because the world sucks enough as it is, especially when your good buddy Evil Villain tells you, hey, somebody's gonna make a 6-inch fully articulated Jakal figure soon. Like, what the shit? And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.